Hi, welcome to my farm training. My name is Rafael and I will be with you during this carbon market training. I really wish you and hope you enjoy such a training, and I will be with you during this module during 4 different classes. I hope you take the advantage and learn a lot with it. Let's start our presentation. So, the first thing that I want to share with you is the objective of such a module. Just remembering that we'll be talking about generalities of a carbon market and how it's applied to agriculture. So to do it so, during this first module, I have divided into 4 different objectives so that I aim to see you getting this type of information and embracing this knowledge by the end of this first module. So the first objective of this module would be understanding the natural carbon cycle and its global significance, followed by explore how human activities disrupt such a balance, such a carbon cycle, and then connect scientific principles to climate policy and carbon markets, and wrapping up this first module, introducing you to the real-world cases on regenerative agriculture applied to carbon markets. Okay? So just skipping and going to the next slide, I'll be sharing with you some of the information on the carbon cycle overview. You can see on the right-hand side of this screen, this very simple, very synthetic carbon cycle resumed, resumed so we can share with you here. Just remembering that all of this knowledge, all of these bullet points and the introduction of this information, they're all backed up by a written document that will be shared with you, which is an extensive document that dives deeper in each of these things, okay? Just to clarify, the carbon exchange and the carbon cycle is something continuous. It's always happened since the planet Earth conformed itself in this shape with this atmosphere. And the carbon cycle itself is something natural that happens as a continual cycles, an exchange of energy, temperature, and carbon amongst atmosphere, lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere. Just for you who is not acquainted with the lithosphere is the crust, is the base, the rock, the base, the ground, okay? The natural equilibrium of this carbon cycle and this exchange of energy and carbons amongst atmosphere, ocean, lithosphere, soil, and biosphere guarantees the balance of this cycle. But it's a natural balance. Once we start to take the equilibrium, we start to take out of the synergistic aspect of it, we start to have some problems, which we'll see on the next slides. Mostly, if you just return to the figure on the right-hand side of this screen, you see that there is a cycle of 2 different colors, the yellow colors and the red colors. The yellow color arrows stands for emissions, and the red colors arrows stands for fixation, for sinking, for sequestering. Different words for the same meaning, And it's driven mainly by photosynthesis, respiration, and the decomposition looping. As you can see, the atmosphere, the trees and the nature, the plants, using the sunlight to produce the photosynthesis, they take up from atmosphere CO2, fix it into its own biomass, turning it into carbon dioxide on carbon biomass. Some of those leaves and other organisms, they decomposed, returning carbon to the soil. Some of this carbon just emit back again to the atmosphere on a normal cycle. This is a very normal. As you can see more on the right-hand side of the figure, you see the fossil fuel combustion, which tends to unbalance it. We do have some limitations, some thresholds that the environment can cope with that, but nowadays, as you know, environment is not very able to cope with such amounts of emissions, which we're going to be seeing on the next slides. Just for you to have an idea, this is another slide on the major carbon pools and fluxuses, how the energy goes, how the energy in, the carbon goes, the carbon, nitrogen, carbon, water, everything happened. This is a very interesting figure here. This figure is on the written material, so you'll be able to explore more in depth on that. But mostly, soil and vegetations, they have, just for you to understand, as a pool, what's the representativeness of a soil and vegetation is around 2,500 gigatons of carbon stored, okay? Which is around 3 times more than atmosphere itself. But when you take a look to the oceanic sink, it's not much. If you see 38,000 gigatons of carbon in dissolved inorganic carbon, you start to understand how important is the water as well, not just the soil, but the oceans, the water, specifically the ocean. And then you start to understand why, when we're talking about climate change or anything related to the carbon emission, carbon sink, carbon pool, we always talk about the oceans, because the oceans influence directly on the land mass, okay? Remember I have mentioned during the second slide that disruption happens when we have imbalance. This is something regarding it specifically. Anthropogenic disruptions. So disruptions caused by man, by human beings. Mostly, and the first bullet point that I have put here for you to understand, to learn, is that the fossil fuel burning and deforestation, they are one of the main drivers of this imbalance of a carbon on the atmosphere. As you can see in the figure, you can see that when you have a deforestation, you have a different cycle of energy, you hit different results. You come from an increase, example, an increase in nutrition decomposition to a nutrient limitation, which is different because the balance and the synergistic cycle has been affected by a negative impact on the environment. And starting, the figure is I have put on proposal because the fossil fuel and the burning and the deforestation are something very important. We see a lot of it happening, and this is the highest contributor to the emission of green land use change, apart from industry, where we're going to see on the next slides. For you to have an idea, the tipping point would be 380 parts per million of a carbon dioxide, of carbon on the atmosphere. Nowadays, we do have 420 ppm as the International Panel for Climate Change. This is a report just released by them back in 2023, and there is a new just being released now in 2025 by the COP that will be held in Brazil. And when you sum up these fossil fuel burning, deforestation, and what we call land use change, you start to cause something on the forest, where you can see on this figure, which is a weakening of terrestrial sinking to land use change. What's the meaning of this sentence? Meaning that this sentence means that you are starting to take the power, take the capacity of the soil, take the capacity of the nature to act as a real sink. When you deplete some of the natural resources, you got to pay back something. And what's happening? The soil cannot cope, the trees cannot cope, the forest cannot cope with it. And then we start to have a very weakened terrestrial capacity of cope with these carbon fluxes in and out. And you start to have some problems. Mainly the human influences and externalities. Remember, externalities here, something that's external of your business, external of your daily activities that affects you. It can be externalities, positive externalities or negative externalities. Here, I'm talking directly regarding negative externalities, okay? The major emitting sectors are energy, 72%, by the burning of coal, by leakage of energy, by wasting energy. This consumes and emits around 72% of the emissions. And then we have transport, industry, and agriculture. But out of those different sectors, agriculture plays an important role, because as it can be improved a lot, specifically when you think about developing countries that are way behind developing countries, we have this capacity. Agriculture has a capacity to become a very carbon neutral, maybe carbon negative, system that can help other systems to reach a balance. Okay, I'll be exploring this by the end of probably the module 3 or module 4 of this training. I'll be diving deeper into the benefits of agriculture to the balance of our greenhouse gases. Okay? Then, following up the presentation, we have the climate change, which equals negative externalities. I have already explained. If I have a changing of patterns of rain, just giving you an example of what the climate change can affect. We change the rain patterns. Example, in my place, the rain tends to begins in September and go all the way to March. Last year, the rain started in November, 2 months later. This results in a negative externality. Instead of sowing the corn in September, I had to sow the corn in November. So I lost 2 months. The farmers around us, they lost 2 months. So they have to plant a seed, a specific seed that costs way more to plant, and they were threatened by the climate. They actually change again in March. So this climate change affects directly food production, water regimen, climate regimen, example, droughts, floods, and etc. And we are noticing it on the news every single day. By the cost of food production is just increasing, the margins of productivity has decreased. Some people, they're still increasing that, but they're doing mostly relying on chemical fertilizers and etc. But when you're thinking about something natural, more based on sustainability, such as regenerative agriculture, this might be a challenge, okay? And then the last bullet point on human influences and externalities, we have the true social costs, which are different than the market prices that result in a need for policy correction. If you don't act under the policy level, defining what's the best policy applicable to that region or that situation, we're going to be having some very heavy social costs and realistic social costs to farmers, to population that normally markets, they don't reflect. Example, to open up a new area in a developing country, a new area for production, many of the farmers, they go towards a virgin forest, untouched forest, meaning that they have to chop down trees, the forest, to make a room for the new cultivation. The end price of that product probably will not reflect the true social and environmental cost of the final product. And that's why we gotta be influencing decision makers by ourselves, by society itself, on influencing political correction to internalize such a thing, avoiding deforestation, but internalize it when it's not avoidable, okay? Just following up the climate policy framework, for you to understand what type of policy we have currently worldwide, we have 3 different ones. We have the mitigation climate policy framework, which is cut or remove greenhouse gas emissions. Or you cut, meaning that you neutralize, you do something that will be avoiding the emission, or you remove the greenhouse gases by changing technology or improving the technology, okay? We do have other acronym or other expression we use, adaptation, which is totally about adjusting systems to the new climate reality. Remember the example I have used in September? We have to use a different seed. The farmers here, they have to use a different seed. They have to use a different resource to produce. So this is a new climate reality. We must adjust the systems, but always thinking about sustainability on long term, not just changing resources by improved resource that might be not the best, but something that is really has a commitment with sustainability, okay? And net zero, which is a balance emissions and removal. The idea here mainly is a publication from the International Panel for Climate Change, is try to balance emissions and removals. Try to have a system that's more neutral, a system that can actually help the atmosphere, can help the climate on the matter, okay? If you think about where these policies, where these things come from, is something to share with you, is the genesis of carbon markets. If you ask, teacher, where did this come from someone's mind, what happened? Just giving you an idea, back in 1997, through the Kyoto Protocol, the protocol that has been signed in Kyoto, Japan, just over 190 countries that have signed a legally binding targets. These countries say, look, by 2000, we'll have accomplished this first step of targets towards sustainability. and by 2015 we have another goals, and so on. This Kyoto Protocol was a type of ultimate environmental challenge for the countries, because the world started to understand and witness some changing on the raining patterns, changing on the environment, and that's why they came up with this idea. Just remembering, Kyoto Protocol 1997 is a result of Brundtland, which has been held in 1987, which was then started by the Brundtland report and then the Stockholm report back in 1982. So this is all connected, 1982, 1987, 1997, 2001, and so on. So we have every certain number of years we have international meetings to define and monitor and see what we have done as human beings, as a society, to achieve something more sustainable, which is now carbon neutrality. Okay? Back in 1997, these legally binding targets, they have set the basis for what we call the Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, the acronym for CDM. Okay? This was comprised of projects in many different countries that created what we call the CERs, credit emission reductions, okay? Just over 2 million credit emission reductions. And it has been implemented by people implementing projects in their own countries for saving mangroves, for avoiding deforestation, for improving agriculture, and so on. Okay, this impacted a lot, but society understood that we need more to evolve as society. And then, back in 2016, we came up with the Paris Agreement, and specifically on the Article number 6, where during this meeting in Paris, or when 197 countries, they got together again and then defined under a national level something defined as NDCs, National Determined Contributions, saying that each of those participant countries on the Paris Agreement, on the COP, the common parts, they have defined for each of their own nationalities a level of emission reduction and commitment towards sustainability. And these were backed up by two other things, by the Article 6.2 and 6.4, which brought some innovations, basically based on cooperative approaches, meaning that the countries, after Paris Agreement in 2016, the countries could get in together, draft their own agenda, and work together to achieve carbon neutrality and sustainability in different areas. And if you look here at the Paris Agreement goals, you see that 5 main objectives they have drafted. Save and increase the forest area to capture greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Hold average increase of global temperature to 2 degrees Celsius. And limit temperature increase to 1.5. And then you hold and limit. Increase ability to adapt to climate change. So increase the nation's, the society, ability to adapt to climate change by creating technology, innovations, and etc. And the very last one was make finance consistent and aligned with agreement goals. Firstly, you come up with idea. Then you draft it. To make it happen, you need financing. You need money. That's why they put as the fifth and the last objective, make finance consistent and aligned with agreement goals. Okay? Then, after that, we have evolved to what we call a CCM and VCM. CCM stands for the compliance carbon market, and the VCM, the voluntary carbon market. The difference of those two, the compliance carbon markets are mandated by governments. They became a law, okay? Like the European Union trading systems, okay? Which is very important, is today it's operating in the European Union, North America, Australia, Japan, other countries, but mainly started in the European Union. And it's mandated by the government. So the businesses, the factories, example, they have a threshold, a limit of emissions. When they surpass that, they must create credits or buy out some credits, okay? This is a government mandate. Each of the government of the countries, of the state, of the provinces, they have their own principle, they have their own objective they must follow up. If they go beyond, they must pay for so. And then on the other hand, we have the voluntary carbon market, which is the voluntary corporate. Example, I have a business myself that I produce dairy, I produce milk, and I emit a lot of gases, but I can neutralize the gases that I emit. But even though I want to improve my image and improve by using marketing tools, or I want to have more commitment with environment, what I do, I can even improve more my practices or support a project that will be creating, will be sequestering carbon from the atmosphere and keeping it on the soil, and at the end of this cycle, we'll be creating some carbon credits. This is not mandated like the CCM, but it creates a better image and brings my opportunity to contribute with the environment while I get recognized by creating credits and selling it on the markets, okay? For you to have an idea which are the main players on this market, we have more than 10 different certifiers. We have probably 14 or 16 big ones. 8 of them are very big, and out of those big ones, we have Verra, Gold Standard, which are 2 top 1 in the world, okay? Just finding that, the European Union ETS, the emissions trading system is a compliance market, as I mentioned before, it's a mandated one. So in European Union, the countries, the provinces, as I say, and the businesses, they must accomplish this objective. Otherwise, they will be asked to do something. Example, supporting projects or paying for such. This ETS emissions trading system has been launched in 2005, and it covers around 35-36% of the European Union emissions, okay? Since it started, it has decreased around 47% of emission reduction. This is a very new, freshly data. And other countries and regions got inspired by the ETS as well, like United Kingdom, South Korea, and China. All of these references, the citations, you'll be able to access on the link of the written material I'm sharing with you. Following up, the voluntary carbon markets, the companies, they offset or they inset emissions. Example, offsetting emission is when they go to the market and they support another project and they create carbon credits. They are not obliged to do so because they're already balanced, but they do so. And they can do the other hand, insetting emissions. Example, I produce dairy, milk, like I said, but I want my system to be neutralized. And I understand that I emit a lot by manure management, by use of nitrogen, and etc. So insetting means that on my food chain, on my chain of custody or chain of production, I'll be neutralizing the emissions on total, from the fertilizer to the final product selling, okay? The difference in setting and offsetting, insetting something that I do internally on my company, and offsetting I do externally, okay? Another thing, the growth in AFULU. AFULU stands for agriculture, forestry, and land use change, okay? This is a huge growth. The society has started to begin to understand, that the agriculture and the forestry, they have an amazing capacity of sequestering carbon by improving food production, sustainability. And that's why there is huge growth on AFULU projects under the voluntary carbon markets. And then we have integrity initiatives, ICVM and VCMI. Those 2 abbreviations, they come for the international. And this is a type of validation that the market does to keep the quality of the projects, keep the integrity of the initiatives. I cannot go to the market and say, I'll be drafting and operating a carbon project under the voluntary carbon market. To do so, I must comply with the rules and be very strict. And those 2 organizations, ICVCM and VCMI, they guarantee that. They guarantee there are standards and procedures that follow some very strong standards of projects, okay? Now I come to a point where I'll be sharing with you some of the real life and real case studies, something that happened and it's happening nowadays in different parts of the world. I start with the Netherlands carbon farming. It's a PPP, which stands for Public and Private Partnership, amongst the Ministry of Agriculture, the University of Wageningen, Rabobank, and Friesland Campina, which is a producer of milk, a dairy producer itself. It is initiative that put together different actors to come up with a positive result. It's basically and based strongly on what we call MRV mechanisms, which MRV stands for monitoring, report, and verification. That is based on remote sensing and soil sampling. What means MRV for carbon projects? All of the carbon projects, to prove that you as an individual or your company is doing something and what you guys are doing are actually positive and realistic, we must monitor what you're doing, communicate by reporting what you're doing, and verifying what you're doing to see. You example say that you have recovered 500 hectares of degraded pasture land and you have implemented the no-till practices where your soil will be untouched and you will be having some no-tillage practices. To make sure that you are doing well, you're actually doing, we need to verify it. How we do? It's a third-party verification. Someone impartial, someone out of the system will go to your farm, in this case, and verify to see, to check your monitoring document, to check your report and see, look, what this person is saying is true. Let's verify, let's give him the label of sustainability and etc. And then he will be able, or you will be able to create your carbon credits, okay? We still have some challenges on the project, specifically this project and the other projects I'm going to share with you. They always step into the same challenges. The cost of monitoring. An example, soil sample. We gotta go, you have to go as a technician, as a farmer, as a project developer. You must provide the verifier, the MRV, remember, the verifier entity that you have actually collect soil, have made the soil analysis before the project and at the end of the first verification period, which will vary around 3 to 5 years. So you gotta collect soil on a certain depth using the certain technology, certain methodology approved by the label that you have choose, example, Vera or Gold Standard, and you gotta show all this analysis, make an analysis and show the result. This is a very costly. That's why one of the challenges is the cost. The second challenge is the baseline uncertainty. I have the baseline of today. I'm not certain. I'm not sure what happened in the past. Okay? And then I have the third challenge, which is the permanence. Imagine the case I have mentioned. You are improving 500 hectares of a degraded pasture land by using conservation agriculture practices. To be very spot on, no tillage system. Who will guarantee that the no tillage system will stay for 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years? It's very hard, and that's why we have a permanence of the benefits as one of the main challenges, because it's very hard to guarantee that the soil will be protected. Okay, and this is happening with all the projects. Permanence is always a menace. The second case study has been implemented in Belgium, France, and United Kingdom. It's called Soil Capital, which is a very wide project, has achieved more than 1,600 farmers and cover more than 350,000 hectares around in those different countries. The base of this project is that the farmers, they get paid for verified carbon improvements. One certificate equals 1 ton of carbon or equivalent on the soil. And these certificates are totally aligned to what we call SBTi /flag. SBTi is a science-based target initiative, meaning that all the practices that you are implementing on a farm are based on the most updated and verified scientific and approved scientific technology. The difference of this soil capital project and the project before is that they evaluate in 5 different dimensions the improving things: soil, biodiversity, water, climate, and socioeconomics. Remember, we're talking about a carbon project. and this project here goes the way beyond carbon. They've been and they are evaluating the improvement on biodiversity, water cycle, climate, and socioeconomic. Because remember, for you to be sustainable, you must be economically sustainable as well. And these guys, they have considered evaluating that, which I think is very interesting. There is an explanation about this project on a written document. I advise you to go and read a bit more about it. Okay, the third case study is the Agrina case study, led by Agrina, which is a Danish company. And they have been working in over 20 different countries in Europe. And they have more than 3 million hectares across around 24 different countries. They do use a methodology called Vera VM0042. The V2.0 is just the version of the tool, but the tool itself is the VM0042, which is a methodology that focuses right on our activities, right on agriculture and land management. Everything related to the crop production, livestock production, grazing, pastures, etc., lies under the VM0042. And Agrina is using such a methodology as its main carrier, to provide farmers with the right consultancy and qualify them to be verified and produce carbon credit. The way they produce is slightly different. The farmers, they can keep or sell the credits, and Agrina provides the technical services, and at the end of the day, on the first period of credit generation, where the farmer itself gets the credit and gets the money, a percentage accorded between the farmer and the Agrina goes to Agrina to cover the costs of the consultancy, and the rest stay with the farmer. Okay? They use something very interesting called the tech stack, technology stack. What means technology stack? Is a technology on top of a technology on top of a technology. A sum up of technological innovation to come up with a good product. And this is mostly based on remote sensing. Okay, they check remote sensing to understand the soil, what's happening at the soil, at the farm level, by checking images from the different satellites, understanding once a month or once every 2 weeks, or maybe once every, depends on the operation, you gotta see every week or maybe once a month. They always check on the photos of remote sensing of satellites to understand if the farmer is actually accomplishing his doing. But at the same time, they use a modeling to understand the carbon fluxes on a soil and to understand the potential results. And like the other two ones, they use the monitoring, reporting, and verification. You haven't noticed that the MRV is transversal to all the projects, because you gotta prove what you're doing and you gotta report it, okay? There are some cross-case insights, okay? The shared model. Those companies and those projects, they pay farms, they verify results, and they sell credits. What mean? They pay farm once the credit is, they verify the results, and they create the credits to sell, okay? All of those projects, those 30 different projects, they share the same issues. The uncertainty on monitoring, report, and verification. The hardship of permanence, as I have mentioned before, is hard to guarantee that a farm will be actually following up the monitoring that you have, the monitoring plan that you have drafted for him. Look, I have drafted for you, sir. Let's do no tillage for the next 10 years, because no tillage will be good for your production, it will be good for the carbon. It's the permanence of the benefits lies on your trust on the farmer, that the farmer will be doing that. And the other common issue that I have not mentioned up to now, and I'll be mentioning now, is the additionality. All the carbon projects in the world, they must improve the baseline situation. Meaning, example, I have a pool of carbon of my soil which is 35 tons per hectare. I know that because I have collected soil on a baseline. I must do something additional that will be adding to it, will be improving it. So I'm expecting to have more than 35 tons of carbon per hectares of soil by the end of the 3rd or the 5th year. Must be additional. The practices that I'll be implementing on a farm must be additional, must improve, must add carbon, must improve my production, or don't decrease more than 5% my production, okay? Must, on the overall situation, add some positive attributes to my production, okay? If you ask me, but if you decide to do just a carbon-focused project, I can forget about the production improvements. No, you cannot decrease more than 5% of your production, of your baseline data. So you must keep your production and improve if it's possible, but you must improve the practices and the carbon on the soil. And there is a leakage as a common issue, so you try to avoid the leakage. Example, use the results to your farm, not to the farm neighboring you, or guarantee that the positive things that you are doing on a farm that's actually additional are not causing problems to the farm or to the region where you are. That's why avoid leakage. Okay? I do have a few more slides to share with you on this first module, which has to do, this information is very important because you will be a carbon developers, some of you, as regarding replications and scaling lessons, how to give a scale to the project. First advice I give you, ensure methodological rigor. Okay? One meaning, if you decide a methodology for soil collection or a new practices for the decrease of use of nitrogen, phosphorus, or potash, be sure that the methodology you're using actually rigorous, are very strong, and okay, specifically on defining baseline or providing more additionality to your system. Okay. Second, which is connected, build economic viability, farmers' payment and farmers' buyer value. Guarantee that what you are proposing to a farmer actually works for the farmer, not works just for the buyer of the credit. It must be positive to a farmer and must be positive to the buyer. If it's too costly to the farmer, he or she will not implement. And then you don't have sustainability in the system. Must be good for the farmer, must be good for the buyer who will be selling this credit on the market. Okay? Other very, very important, step out of the carbon tunnel. We call the carbon tunnel. People just looking at carbon. Go beyond it. Integrate the co-benefits. Focus on soil, not just soil carbon, but soil health. Focus on biodiversity. Focus on water, and it just goes on. This will help the entire system, not just the carbon itself, but the entire system will be more sustainable. And plan for transparency and governance. Always look at that. When you plan for transparency, meaning all the players of the project will be on the same page, there's no bad news, things will go better. And the governance, give the people right to stand their hands and say, look, I'm not happy with that, I want to do. Example, the farmer. Hear the farmer. Give his or her an opportunity to be heard. This will help you a lot in the project. Okay? Some of the conclusions we come up with this presentation is that the carbon cycle science is the foundation of carbon markets. Understanding the carbon cycle, this is very natural, always existed, so you must understand. So by understanding the carbon cycle science, you understand how a crop will behave, how a changing on the practice will behave, and the potential results of it. Okay? Human activities have disrupted the natural balance. We know that, but we do have the capacity to reverse it. Third, carbon markets internalize climate externality via price signals. Okay? As much as society and the market notice that they need something more sustainable, and the sustainability can be provided by farms, more the carbon markets will be put on the top. The carbon markets, they have the capacity to internalize such a perception and demands. Okay? And the last bullet point, regenerative agriculture offers a practical path for mitigation and rural benefits. To clarify, regenerative agriculture is not a science itself. It's a compendium, a gathering of sustainable agriculture practices, put it together. They're looking at the future. And all of the concepts of a regenerative agriculture from Wisconsin University, British Columbia Universities, Harvard, Bologna, Ferrara, they are always have something in common. They look at the soil as the most important thing on the system. And that's why we do have the name regenerative agriculture, because it does regenerate the soil, which is the base that sustains all the systems. Okay? These are the references. You will have the access on the written material. You can click and see the document. And I have a question to wrap up this module, which is, I give it to you. I'll be sharing my personal contact. You can drop me a message with that. I'll be very happy to read you to understand what you thought about the class and your answer on that, which goes like that. How can soil carbon projects balance scientific credibility, farmers' incentives, and market integrity? Okay? Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your attention. Sorry if I'm too quick on my explaining, but be sure that on the next module, the thing will be just improving and diving deeper into the carbon markets applied to agriculture. I hope you had a good time, and see you then. See you next time.